Man, I know a guy who believes if people knew the real him, they would walk away. So he hides, he performs, and he pretends. But what if the thing he's most afraid of is the very thing that could set him free? Stay with me. Thanks for joining me again, men, on I Know a Guy podcast. I'm your podcast host, Steve Cummings, and at Bringing Kingdom, we are helping men understand and get to the promised land of living fearlessly as beloved sons. And we've got a mountain to climb, and we need a Sherpa. We need someone who's been down that road before. And today, I want to conclude our series we've been talking about the last 5 days on shame. Over the past few episodes, we've talked about shame as the real enemy. We've talked about quick fixes, refusing help, finding a Sherpa, and putting skin in the game. But all those conversations lead to one final question. What happens when a man finally stops hiding? What happens when he steps into the light? And what happens when he risks being fully known? To answer that question, I want to revisit one of the most beloved stories Jesus ever told, because at its core, it's a story about shame, and it's a story about coming home. You all know it, and it's the story of the prodigal son. A young man demands his inheritance. He leaves home, he wastes everything, he makes terrible decisions, loses it all, ends up feeding pigs, and eventually finds himself sitting in a field wondering how his life fell apart. We've all heard it. It's a very powerful story. But I think there's a detail that we often overlook. Imagine the shame he must have been carrying. Think about it. He didn't just make a mistake. He publicly rejected his father. He humiliated his family. He squandered everything he had been given, and now he had nothing. No money, no reputation, no dignity, no plan, just failure. And maybe that's why this story resonates with so many of us men, because most of us know what it's like to sit in the rubble of our own decisions, right? Maybe not feeding pigs, but we've all had moments when we thought, how did I get here? I had that feeling 9 years ago when I was sitting on the porch in Woodstock, Georgia, in rehab. Maybe it was a broken relationship or a poor decision or an addiction, a season of hiding or a secret nobody knew, a wound that shaped our lives. Men, whatever it was, shame begins whispering, you've gone too far. You're disqualified. Brother, you've ruined everything. Your father, capital F, doesn't want you anymore. And here's what's fascinating. The son believes it. Listen to what he rehearses on the way home. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. That's Luke 15:21. So did you catch that? Did you hear what was driving that response? He says, I'm no longer worthy. Man, that's shame talking, not guilt. That's shame. Guilt says I did something wrong. What does shame say? I am something wrong. The son isn't just questioning his actions, he's questioning his identity. And that's exactly what shame does. It convinces us men that what we did has become who we are. That's BS. But Jesus isn't finished with the story. In fact, he's just getting started. Because before the son can even finish his speech, something incredible happens. And Jesus tells us while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. Luke 15:20. All right, man, stop there for just a moment. The father saw him. That means the father was looking, right? He was watching. He was waiting, and he was hoping. The son, he expected what? Rejection. The father was preparing for reunion. The son expected punishment, and the father was preparing a celebration. And the son expected distance, and the father started running. And men in that culture, dignified men didn't run. Patriarchs didn't run. Fathers didn't run. Yet, this father runs. Why? Because love moves toward people, especially wounded people, especially ashamed people, especially sons trying to find their way home. The father embraces him, puts a robe on him, places a ring on his finger, and throws a celebration. And here's what I love most. The father never lets the son finish his shame speech. The Father doesn't negotiate his worth, and he doesn't put him on probation. He doesn't make him earn his way back. The Father simply restores him immediately, fully, completely. Why? Because he never stopped being a son. And maybe that's what one of you listening today needs to hear. You may have made your mistakes. You may have wandered. You may have hidden. You may have spent years believing shame's lies. But your worst moment never had the power to change your identity. You may be a wounded son. You may be a struggling son. You may be a recovering son. But if you belong to Jesus Christ, you are still a son. That's why shame is such a liar, because shame says, hide. The Father says, come home. Shame says, you've ruined everything. And the Father says, I've been waiting for you. Shame says, you'll never change. And the Father says, let's begin again. The entire gospel is a story of a father moving toward his children, not away from them. And when a man finally believes that, guess what? Everything changes, because beloved sons don't have to hide anymore. Here's my reflection question. What shame story have you been rehearsing? And what would change if you believed the Father was running toward you instead of away from you? As we wrap up the series, I want to leave you with a simple truth. Shame loses its power when we step into the light, when we tell the truth, when we receive grace, when we stop performing, when we stop hiding, and when we begin living as beloved sons. Maybe that's your step today. Not trying harder, not becoming perfect, just coming home. If this series has resonated with you and you'd like help taking that next step, I would love to walk alongside you. Whether through identity coaching, a Bringing Kingdom retreat, or reading our Friday morning From the Porch email, there are safe places where your story can be heard and your heart can heal. And if this topic of fathers, identity, and beloved sonship connects with your own story, I'd encourage you to check out my new book, The Father Eclipse. I'll put a link to Amazon in the show notes, because so many of the shame messages we carry were formed long before we ever knew they existed. And you can learn more about this at bringingkingdom.org. So just remember this as we leave today. You are not what you did. You are not what was done to you. You are a beloved son. And beloved sons bring kingdom by loving others well.